Okay, and then let me share again. All right, because I have forgotten to record before. So I'm really excited to introduce our speaker, our special guest speaker for tonight, Daisy Olsen. Daisy's worked in and around the WordPress community since 2007. She's spoken at WordCamps in New York City, Boston, and Chicago. She also helped to organize the first WordCamp Boston in 2010. Currently, Daisy works for Automatic as a developer relations contributor on the WordPress project, open source project. In her spare time, you'll often find Daisy listening to audiobooks while knitting. She loves to travel when it's safe to travel, right? With her family. Will often spend many weeks throughout the year visiting different places. Please join me in welcoming our special guest, Daisy Olsen.
Thank you very much.
Yep, I'll stop sharing.
All right, let me start sharing then. Just a moment while I find the right window. There are far too many of them here. All right, and I'll have to switch screens a couple times, but here we are. So my topic for tonight is related to block patterns, which were introduced lightly during the talk about 5.6. My name is Daisy Olsen. I did not update this slide to include the correct meetup, but I live in New Hampshire, so my local meetup group would be the New Hampshire WordPress meetup. And I'm very excited at the one benefit of this all remote meetups format is that I can talk at a lot of different meetups and there's no barrier of location. So while it would be a 2-hour drive for me to get to Hartford, it's just a click away to come join you on a Zoom call. So I look for all of the little nice things that I can find. Starting in WordPress 5.5, a option to create block patterns was added to WordPress. And the idea behind block patterns is to give you the opportunity to create a layout of sorts, to pre-configure your a group of blocks and save them, and to use it as a kind of a starting point. So here's something that Justin Tadlock said on WP Tavern: block patterns will change everything. And what he meant by that is it expands the options for, especially for plugin, theme, and agency style WordPress folks, to be able to create these predefined groups of blocks. The block editor is extremely powerful. There's so much that you can do with it if you know your way around. And while it can feel like a barrier in the beginning, the possibilities are really endless. And then with the plugin space and theme developers tapping into that, it expands even more. So a quick overview of what we're going to go over here. Introduction, kind of already covered that. We're going to look at working with blocks in the block editor. We're going to talk about what block patterns actually are and what they aren't. And what they aren't are reusable blocks, which is a different feature in WordPress, which we will go over because it's very easy to confuse the two because they operate in a somewhat similar way, but how they operate on your site is quite different, and how they are loaded by WordPress is quite different. We'll look at setting up a block pattern, how you would use the WordPress block editor to start creating a pattern, and then how you would take the code for that pattern and convert it to the code that you need to register the pattern. And then we'll look at a quick way to register a block pattern without code using a plugin. We'll hopefully have some time for questions. If you have questions while I'm presenting, maybe just drop them in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye on that so that I can answer questions as they come up. So let me just get that up here so that I can see. Great.
And I'll bring those to your attention too, Daisy, as people are doing it.
That would be very helpful. Thank you. And at the event, and I have a very short survey that I'll give the link to everyone in the chat. And if you would like to fill it out, there's no obligation and every question is optional. But there are a couple questions on there about personal information that if you wanted to provide that to me, then I might just reach out in a few weeks or a few months and see how you may have been able to utilize this information. So let me switch over to a different screen here. Okay. So did that lose the share? Can you see the green?
We can see,
site?
Yep, we can see the site.
Okay, great. So this is just a quick dummy site that I set up just for the purposes of this workshop. And on the home page, what you have are examples of all of the core block patterns. So there are a number of block patterns that come with WordPress out of the box. Current trend seems to be very fond of Don Quixote because all of the text and the imagery is related to that book. But there are just some, they're kind of like a starting point. Some of these you might potentially use. They could be used as a place to begin. So, and they all have some content that you start off with. So in this case, let's look at how to insert or how to access the block patterns. So this we covered a little bit already, but the way that you access the block patterns is up here in the upper left corner using the primary inserter. And you may see up to 3 things here. The first column is going to be your blocks. Those are single blocks that you would add regular content with. The second one is patterns.
Daisy, sorry to interrupt, but it looks like
yes.
you're just sharing the screen that has workshop.daisyolsen.com. I'm not seeing any other screen.
All right, let me try resharing. Thank you for letting me know that. Okay, can you see this block pattern example?
That looks better.
Okay, hopefully that'll work better. Okay, I'll back up a little bit. So you use starting from here, the blue plus sign, or if you've switched it to the text like what was demonstrated earlier, you might just say add block or something like that. And then you may see 2 or 3 columns underneath the search. So if you it opens by default to blocks, which is usually what you're going to be adding when you're adding new blocks to a page or a post. The second piece is patterns. And as was mentioned before, you're going to have your theme-based block patterns, which 2021 comes with quite a few of them. And then it's going to have buttons, columns, galleries, headers, and text, which are the core categories. So as you go through these, you'll see all of the core block patterns that are included as almost like boilerplates. I would say that there's really more of a feeling of them demonstrating what's possible with a block pattern, though certainly people would be able to use these. And then the third column is reusable blocks. And these are stored in the database and they're managed globally. So when we talk about block patterns, these are actually stored as code. You would add them to a plugin or a theme, usually, and it would register it in a way that is not unlike registering a custom post type. So if you're familiar with registering custom post types, the process is somewhat similar. So I am going to do something that I recommend that no one ever do, and I'm going to use the plugin editor on my WordPress site for just because it's a little faster. But don't ever do this on a real site.
We would absolutely agree with that. Never ever.
They give you this nice warning that's not nearly serious enough about making changes to active plugins is not recommended. But so this is a very simple plugin that I created to register a block pattern. It starts off, the top part is just giving WordPress the information that it needs so that it knows that this is a plugin. It doesn't have anything very sophisticated as far as checking, error checking and all of that. But what it does have is my function, my register block patterns function here. And it adds the action to the init hook so that it will run this code when the site loads. So the only check that I do have is this if class exists, to make sure that this class of WP block patterns registry actually exists on your WordPress install. Because if you were to install this on an older version, pre 5.5 version of WordPress, it would potentially cause you an error because block patterns don't exist. So in order
Can I
to
ask you real quick on that? If you install
Sure.
Classic Editor, would that function still exist if you have a Classic Editor
Yes.
enabled?
Yeah, the Classic Editor does not actually remove the block editor. It just allows you to bring back the Classic Editor.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. And when you have the Classic Editor plugin, at least the official Classic Editor plugin, if you have that installed and activated, you have the option of choosing which experience you're going to have. You can still use the block editor with the Classic Editor installed.
Right.
The function to register a block pattern category, which was the drop down. So we're in here under patterns, this block down, you can add new categories to this list. So that's the first thing that I've done here is I register a new block pattern category and I give it an ID of my patterns. That is like the sanitized name of this thing for WordPress to use. And then the second item in this call is it's actually an array because you could potentially create multiple pattern categories here. I'm giving it a label of my custom patterns, and this is wrapped like this so that it can get a text domain, which would allow it to be translated. It wouldn't apply very often if it's just your own code that you're going to use for yourself or a client, unless it's a multilingual site. But it's a good practice to understand how to do these localized text strings. So once the block pattern category is optional, it would still work if you didn't give it a category. The next section looks really long, but what you have is register block pattern. So we're actually going to register the block pattern. It looks a lot like registering a custom post type. You're going to, again, give it an ID. In this case, it actually starts with my patterns, and then it's got a / and then my pet details is what I was naming this particular block pattern. And then it goes into an array. And in this array, you'll have a title. At the very minimum, you need a title and content. So you can also add description, which actually I think doesn't do anything at the moment. Probably if they change the user interface a little bit, then they would display this description more out in the open. And the categories. The categories are helpful because if you register a lot of block patterns, it's very easy to get this endless scroll and trying to find them is difficult. Excuse me. And below, so within the content, basically, this is a little comment that I added just for a note. But I usually will start them with a single quote mark, and then paste all of my code for my block pattern, which I'll show you how to get to, and then close it with a single quote. The reason I use single quotes is because it means you don't have to escape as many characters in your code. If you were to have single quotes within your block patterns code, then you would want to escape those with an escape character, which I think is a \. I should know this, but I believe it's \.
Yeah.
Which would let the program know that it should not count this as the end of your code. So But other than that, you typically don't need to do a lot of escaping in here, which is helpful. But if you had like a apostrophe that wasn't a curly quote type of apostrophe, then you might need to escape that. In my case, I don't have anything like that, so I have not gone through that process. And then you close it out. And what I have is this plugin I have as a zip file, which I'll link to in the chat. So if you want to take a look at the code, you can see what it looks like. And then I have a second block pattern at the bottom, and this one I had already populated, but in the plugin file, it's just a paragraph tag. It's just an empty paragraph tag there, so that you could replace that with your own content. So, and that's basically all there is to registering a block pattern. Now, to get the information to register, what you would do is get out of here, start from a blank poster page. And then you would just add your blocks. Let's say you wanted to make like a 3-column with a list in each one. Maybe make it kind of like a pricing. See if I can do a shortcut here. Okay, and then maybe I would want to add a button. Maybe add the button to each column. The inserters could still use a little bit of interface help here.
I like to see I'm not the only one who struggles with this part of the plugin.
Okay.
It is,
all right.
the struggle is real.
Quick
Somebody from
aside.
Automatic
Yeah.
can't do it, then I feel so much better.
The simple fact that you have to place above something and then arrow it down.
Yeah.
I was hoping they were fixing that in 5.6 and they did not.
I can tell you that there's always a lot of discussion around this in the design teams, but it's not the easiest thing to solve for. Really? They explore a lot of possibilities. I can tell you that.
It always it's okay to go above something, but to put it right below.
Yeah. Every once in a while it'll work, but not always. And then I guess that the default behavior for a button is to add a new one on enter.
Yeah.
So,
and
I had not seen before.
If we have time at the end, I have found a new plugin that is very cool. So if we have time.
I think I saw it on your install. So.
Yeah.
I was planning to go check it out because I'm always curious to see what the plugin space is doing to improve the UI.
Yeah, it's great.
All right, so what we have here is we have a 3-column block with inner blocks for the lists and the buttons. Okay, and of course you would change your design and add your links and make it however you wanted it to be styled, because part of the point of these block patterns is to have your branding already in place. So you would want to have it as close design-wise as you can to the way you want your end product to be. Now I've added some basic content here. You can do that, or you could just leave it like with an empty starter bullet point if you wanted to as well. Now the way the code for blocks works is it's just HTML markup. And if you were to switch this, save this, and then go back to Classic Editor, you would still have all that same HTML markup. So it is kind of backward compatible. You can kind of flip back and forth to some extent, depending on how complex your content is. So what we're going to do is, let me slow this down a little bit. Up in the upper right corner, you have options, which is the 3 dots. Lots of options here. Recommend just checking out what's possible. But right, by default, you're in the visual editor, which is the block editor. You can also switch to code editor, and that's what we want to do now. And what it does is it switches it over so you can see all of the HTML for the blocks that are on that post or page. And this is what we take and we select all of it and we copy it. And then we go back to our plugin. And then in the content, whoops, between those single quotes, go to here, I can paste that in and it's just going to replace it. And I'm going to take a deep breath and assume that I have not made any syntax errors and hit update file. Okay, I think that worked. So now if I go and then I create a new page, I need to switch back to visual mode first. Go here, go to patterns, go to, I have to remember which one is which. I think I called it my custom pattern. Yeah, my custom patterns. Here, and then I have 2 patterns. Both of them are registered by that plugin. The first one I have is the one that I created ahead of time. That's like, if it were for a pet adoption, you could have these main headings already populated so that you don't have to do all the work every time. And then you just add the details for that thing. But the one that I just created was this under my custom patterns, and it's here down at the bottom. And you can see it gives you a nice, lovely preview of what that block pattern is going to look like. That is already styled the way your theme is telling it to be styled. So in this case, it's got the green background and it has the styles that are applied by 2021.
And Daisy, just again, I ask this, I guess, for others, but myself too. So when you place that pattern, like the one you just had of the item 1, item 2, text in there, that's just placeholder text, right? It's more of a template that you can then change those item 1, 2s, and 3s into whatever you want, correct?
Yep.
Yep.
And it will not, so if you change this, the text after you've inserted it into your content, it will not change anything about that block pattern that's been registered. That will stay exactly the way it was. So the next time you use it, you'll have that boilerplate content again.
Right.
And this is where the difference between block patterns and reusable blocks come in. If you have a reusable block, let me see if I can. So I have this reusable image block, okay? So let's say it was something I was always gonna try to keep this to be the most recent version of WordPress. So this is XD, the previous 5.5 version. If I use this reusable block in a post or a page, I can use it again and again and again across my site, and it's all managed in one central location. That means that if I change this reusable block, everywhere I've ever used this block, it's going to. So if I edit this and I replace this image, let me get the posts up so you can see the before and after. Okay, so I have reusable block 2 and I have reusable block. They both have that same block already placed in them. If I replace this, and I'm not sure why this is like this, makes me scroll around to get to the thing. And I change it to the Simone image.
Yeah.
And I hit save. It'll change it here in this post that I'm editing, but it will also change it here. And it will change it here.
Yep.
So things like about content or like a bio that you use on multiple places, or any kind of like content that you might want to always have the same, but you still want to be able to edit. only one time when you want to change it, this is a really good way to do this. Before block patterns, what people would do is they would take this, they would add in their reusable block, okay, and they would convert it to a regular block, and then they would edit it. And that would do basically the same thing as a block pattern. It was just a few more steps. So now if I save this draft and I go back to here, it doesn't affect the reusable block because I converted it to a regular block and then changed it.
Hey, Daisy, we have a question. I think I know the answer to, but
Okay.
I'll let you answer it. Somebody says, can you go back into that pattern code, I think, and make tweaks and updates to that plugin file? If you do that, would it apply those changes to all the pages? And I think the answer is no, because you're just—
The answer is no.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. It is only a template. It's just a starting point. Once you've inserted that block pattern into your content, it is completely disconnected from your block pattern. It is just blocks at that point. It is just content on that one page or post. So it is not for something like that. You would need something a little bit more advanced, like a template of some kind.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see. Are there any questions about the difference between reusable blocks and block patterns? Great. All right, let's see. I lost my chat screen, so let me get that back up here. Okay, so a lot of people are not going to want to write the code for this. The benefit of having this in your code is if you're working with clients who have branding requirements and you don't want them to be able to edit this, you want it to always be the same experience every time they use it, putting it in the code is ideal. But if it's your own site, you might not want to have to register it. And then if you do register it and you put it in your theme, then it's tied to your theme. So you would lose that if you were to move to a new theme. The VK block patterns plugin is an alternative to this. This is actually not the only option in the repo. I only chose this one because it also has categories. Some of them only just give you the interface to create a block pattern. This is just a custom post type. So if you go to create a block pattern using this plugin, you're just getting the same view that you would creating a post or page. It just wouldn't be something that you would be able to view on the front end of your site. It's only here to give you an interface to create these block patterns. So, and then you can create as complicated of a thing as you want. We could say, add an image, make it a nice little puppy dog, you know, so you can create your block pattern and publish it. You can set it to a category or create a new category so that when you go to insert it, it will give you that hierarchy so you can find your patterns. If you were creating a lot of them, that really does make a difference. So, and then if you're back in a new post, and you go in here to patterns, then my category is the ones that I've created in this plugin. So you can see the ones that I had before, and this is the one that I just created. So the question I've gotten about using a plugin like this is, will it affect those the resource requirements of my site? And the answer is, I don't think it will. And the reason that I say that is because once you insert your block pattern into the post, it's just regular content. So the only time that the plugin comes into play is during the insertion process or when you're creating a new pattern.
So Daisy, for this plugin, the one that you just showed, how do you what if I want to use those same patterns on another website? How would I get those? Like, I would have to install that plugin on the other site to begin with, which would be blank with none of these patterns. But how do I get these other patterns moved over to the other site?
Yeah, ideally there would be a way to export them, but actually probably you could, because they're just post types. So I bet, let's find out if I'm right. I think that if you go here, you can export the regular WordPress XML. It's just regular content. So it probably will export and you can import it into the new site.
Okay.
Now, there is an effort underway to create, I don't know if anybody's familiar with the block directory. This is kind of a segue, but I promise I'm going somewhere with it. There are certain types of blocks that you can install from your block editor. So this one I happen to know is here because it was done by one of my teammates. There's a recipe block here. If I click on this, first it's going to insert the recipe, but it also will install the plugin that goes with it. It installs and activates the plugin and it inserts the block into the poster page. Okay. There's going to be something similar at some point for block patterns where people can submit block patterns to a directory that will then be available for people to use. And they will probably be limited right for the moment to core blocks, but people could create some really interesting things just with core blocks, save them for general usage, and then anyone would be able to access them. But there's nothing to install for those because it's just HTML markup. So
ask another question since until others
Sure.
jump in, so I'm not hogging the microphone here. But this brings up a question though of what if I install blocks that are non-core blocks? Can I create patterns with those? So I'm using like cadence blocks, for example. Can I obviously I can create, something, a layout with that. Can I reuse those blocks in a block pattern?
You should be able to. Obviously, any site that they were on would need to have that plugin enabled for the block to be present. But it all depends on the plugin, the block from the plugin being very WordPress oriented. If they're using something like in metadata to show that block exists on the page to add a script or something to that effect, it might not work because the metadata would not come over with the block pattern.
Well, even I guess I'll shut up after this too. But even those core blocks, the way you originally did it, where you went into the code editor and you grabbed the HTML, is there any risk in that somehow breaking over time? Like, I don't know, is the way that those core blocks are defined, is that static now? I know things were changing before Gutenberg launched, but is there any risk that Gutenberg 5.7 will add something to the paragraph block or the whatever block, and now your block pattern is no longer compatible with the latest version of the blocks that went into it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and honestly, there's never going to be a guarantee that nothing will ever change. But once something hits core, they try really hard to not break it. And so it's actually a really big deal to change markup in WordPress, in core, anything that's going to be output, because of all of it would affect potentially like, I don't know what, 39 million websites. So that's pretty extreme. I don't think that any change would affect every website out there, but that's the potential. It's just a lot of websites.
Somebody else has a question in the chat, which again I think I know the answer to, but I'll bring it up. This says these are fairly static layout components. They're wondering, can functionality be tied into these? So this is the whole, I guess, plugin versus layout or markup. So
Right, and the plugin, the blocks are only going to be as functional as the block is. Now, there are some, this is moving into plugin space here, but there are plugins that would allow you to have, like wrap your blocks with conditionals to display them under certain circumstances. I've used those before, but this is extending outside of core. So I think I need an example of what kind of functionality you might be looking to integrate here, because it could cover a potentially really big amount of possibilities.
and I think that maybe the way I would answer that too is, as you said, if you think about the blocks themselves, so the blocks can have functionality. So like imagine like a slider block, for example, that's not in core, I don't think, or maybe it is, but something like a slider block or gallery block, which there's functionality behind it. Like when you can use that in a pattern, but the pattern isn't what's, what I think Daisy was showing. That's not where you would put the functionality. You would still need the actual block itself that implements. Like, Daisy, do you mind going back to the markup again for a second? Maybe,
Sure.
maybe that will make it more apparent. Because in the markup code, the markup itself is still saying, I think that's what's telling WordPress what to do with these. So like a button, for example, is a particular class, right? A WP block button. The functionality
what WordPress is looking at is what's in the comment. So if it sees WP:buttons, it knows that it's starting a button block.
But a button itself, the functionality behind what a button does, like JavaScript and all that kind of stuff, that is inherent in that thing. It's not in here. It's not in the code here, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in the case of the recipe, that's a little bit more of an advanced type of a block. It's got a little bit more going on, but what shows up in here and what makes it work is it's just got this comment and then it closes the comment at the end, which is actually further down than I realized. It's way down here.
But that was good because that shows you the recipe itself was made up of basically an image and a paragraph, right? And then there's other pieces in here, but
right. And what you have is you insert a single block, but it's really multiple blocks that are part of this. It's like outer and inner blocks that are all added together, and then you can work with them once they're in within your content. And now, so something else that's coming along is called full site editing. Yeah. And what that will do is allow you to have block-based themes, and there will be some more functional blocks that go along with that, like navigation blocks that could contain other blocks. And you would have query blocks that would replace the loop that you have in a classically designed theme. And what else? You would have template parts that would give you a header and a footer, and there would be certain blocks that would be designed for those spaces. So it's definitely going to change the way that people potentially create WordPress themes. But that is another topic, a big one.
I mean, I think for some of us, like myself, who I use Divi primarily, I think it's very familiar, and I know others using Elementor or things like that. I mean, this is basically bringing that kind of functionality, which always made, one of the reasons I used Divi for so long is because of things like this. These are saved layouts, basically, Divi libraries where you would see this, and then globals are the same thing as the reusable. So, and now your ability to build templates in Divi, you're right, things are merging back into this, which is nice. I mean, that's where it really belongs. It belongs in core, not in these, every theme is doing it their own way.
Right. And I don't think that those page builder plugins are going to go away. They're still going to fill a need, but hopefully core can start to fill some of the gap that was there. Yeah. All right. So I have just pasted my little simple plugin with the block code already in place if you're interested in that. And I'll put a link to the block pattern plugin that I demonstrated if you're interested in that.
Mhm.
And then I have my little survey here. And I'm not necessarily shutting this down. I'm just getting this little piece of housekeeping handled. So I think that there's a lot you could do with these. And as I said, when you're working with a client, it can become very useful. I've as of about 3 months ago, I was in an agency. So I know that world and what it requires. And when you hand off a project to someone who maybe isn't very technical, you want to try to remove some of the big red buttons that could blow their website up. So,
I mean, in a lot of ways, it reminds me of like, that's the advantage of custom post types. And that's another topic we actually haven't covered in a lot of detail, although Peter and I talked about doing that. So, the reason you create a custom post type of team member or something is so that that your client is going to create team members over time. You want it to be structured and how they enter in that data. To me, this seems like that at a kind of a micro level of blocks. Like, yeah, you want to give them the ability to do these, put these things together, but you want control over it so that they don't have to rebuild the recipe thing every single time, right?
Right. And a lot of people have traditionally been using ACF to handle this, advanced custom fields, which will also allow you to create blocks out of your custom fields. So that actually gives you a little bit more control over the experience because it is like a field. You fill in the form and then you have the thing already configured the way that you need it to be. But the barrier of entry for a developer is much lower for block patterns because you don't have to know what to do with that ACF stuff on your front end. Excuse me.
Yeah, as we tell our group often in WordPress, there's so many ways to ultimately do the same thing. And there are pros and cons to each, but not so clearly delineated because there's so many other factors that can determine, where you are, including, where your expertise lies. That's its own factor, which gets kind of interesting. Because I'm looking at blocks from the custom post type side because that's where I have more practice. So it's pretty interesting to figure out which path. The other part that I think can be confusing to folks is that the words that we use to describe things there's been a lot of overlap and a lot of, the word pattern itself has been used in different ways and different things. And it can be confusing, especially when now it gets applied to something, a block pattern has become a very specific thing when not too long ago, people were using the phrase block patterns as a descriptor of doing a type of thing. Now it is a thing, if you know what I mean. So that always becomes.
I always find myself having to double check my vocabulary because for me, these feel like layouts. I feel like it should be layout, but a layout means something different in WordPress. So they haven't used that. And it means, or template means something completely different. And so there are all of these terms that have already been used. So they keep having to get a little more creative with the words that they use. And if you have something like a block directory or like a block collection plugin, like Atomic Blocks, or now it's called Genesis Blocks, I think. They have layouts there and that are very similar to block patterns. They aren't the underlying code is not the same, but even the way you create one to add to it is similar to the way you register a block pattern.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the block, I guess getting back to like the meta thing too, so block patterns back to the idea of reuse of this, as you said, I'm trying to, because I've created, I just put in the chat window too, somebody else was asking about, have any of us used, created an entire site using these tools? And I know Peter's been more at the forefront of our group of Gutenberg and pushing it and showing us things. And I did finally bite the bullet, and I built a site recently using Cadence and blocks entirely. And it was an interesting experience coming from the Divi world. I struggled a bit of where things are and all that. I mean, eventually it came out fine. But I'm trying to think, in that site I just built, I did not use any patterns or create any patterns. So as I'm thinking this through, Daisy, like the use case of patterns, I assume it would be something where it's mainly, as you said, it's reuse within kind of an agency model, right? Because these aren't patterns I would like sell on the marketplace or whatever, right? Because that goes back to my whole earlier discussion of you still need those core blocks in place. So these aren't things I would necessarily, I guess I wouldn't send my block patterns to Peter or that plugin to Peter and say, hey, Peter, look, here's the way I've constructed these things. I guess unless there's something like the recipe one that is of value to somebody besides me, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that there's space there. I think that if a block collection plugin wanted to buy into the block pattern idea, like using the Genesis blocks or Atomic blocks, depending on which version that company loves to change their names. So yeah. I used to work for Studio Press. So
oh, really?
Yeah.
I have Studio Press lifetime for $79 or some ridiculous thing from way back when. But
I have it too from before I worked there.
Yeah, wow.
I was actually, there was a thought I was heading towards. So the Atomic blocks layouts, it's a feature of the plugin. If they were to take that and convert it over to use actual block patterns, it would be really seamless. Like it would just work. And I don't know if they have any plans to do that. They are completely bought into block editor and full site editing and the future of WordPress. And that's one thing that I love about Studio Press. Even now that they're owned by WP Engine, they still keep with that. We're going to do it the WordPress way. Yeah. But if they get ahead of WordPress and they've already created something that then WordPress adds themselves, then I don't know what they'll do with that, which is where they're at with their layouts.
Hey, Peter, you use Cadence a bit, right? You're more familiar with kind of the way that Cadence is doing things, right? The Cadence theme or
Cadence, yeah. I'm actually focusing now on Generate Press, but go ahead.
So Cadence has something that's a little bit funny, and I wish I don't have my site up that had it, but like in Cadence, if I create, let's say, it's one of my blocks is I create a row, a single row. As part of that, I'm able to create one of the options that Cadence gives me when I'm dropping a block in is a pre-formatted template, but I don't think those are reusable blocks. You know what I mean? Like Peter, like you can drop one in and it's, they have things that are formatted. They look really nice. They'll have like an accordion thing, or they'll have a side-by-side image and all that. But
yeah,
I'll have to go a little bit deeper.
I can look at it and tell you probably how they're doing it. Give me just a second.
Yeah.
If you're curious.
I can find that site that I'm talking about.
So there are a couple of other things in block development. There are variations, and then there are block styles. And if you're in, let me just get, I'm putting it on my Sandbox site, which is probably pretty messy, but I might even already have Cadence installed here.
I'm bringing up one of my demos.
I do not. Okay. And I can tell you the difference between them, which is completely off topic also, but if you're interested, I'm happy to keep going.
Yeah, no, and we want to make sure that you've covered what you want to cover.
Oh yes, I have covered everything that I had planned for tonight.
Great, because this is where we do have the branch off and the talk, and we can look. Yeah, I like doing what we're doing now. So too
cool.
But thank you for everything you've done, because it all sets the stage for a lot of this kind of conversation.
Good. Yeah.
Great. Okay.
were you talking about the row? Which
No,
one?
so, yeah, so if you add a road layout, let's say to begin with, so yeah, add a road.
Okay, these are variations.
Or do the pre-built library. Yeah, do
Oh.
pre-built library. So in here,
Yeah,
these are styled patterns, layout patterns. So to me,
This is their answer to block patterns.
correct.
yeah, so is it, they've implemented their own way of doing this, right? These are not actually block patterns.
Probably not. No, they're not, but they're functioning in the same way as a block pattern.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's the code. It's similar to, and Daisy, if you're willing to, I can show it on my screen, or you can take a look. There's two sites that again contribute to all of this. One is shareablock.com, and the other one is Gutenberg Hub. So you were talking about this idea of places where people can share block patterns.
Right.
And again, the idea is, part of it is the definition of what a block pattern is versus the JSON, the code behind a bunch of blocks that are together, but that you can pull that code, paste it onto your site, and it is a block pattern, but it's not registered as a block pattern that you're pulling from the block pattern dropdown. It is a shared pattern of blocks.
How do you pull it into your site though? Is it you have to create a plugin to pull it in?
No, it's literally copy and paste. So
share a block is going to just give you the code to add to the code view of your post, or you could use it to register a block pattern.
Yeah,
So,
right.
If you just paste it into one page, then it's only available in that one page.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So if I go here, I'm gonna collect your. It's interesting because I think I'm already on their mailing list. So.
Yeah.
But I guess as Daisy's doing this, hopefully other folks are enjoying this conversation as much as I am, because we're into nerdy stuff, which I love. But to me, that this kind of shows where, I mean, Gutenberg and blocks now has advanced quite a bit since, the past 2 years or so. But it still feels like we're in a bit of a Wild West period where some information, maybe it's because Gutenberg or WordPress itself is catching up to the demand here. Like, I love this idea of people being able to share, blocks and patterns and all that. Yeah. It's getting there, but right now it feels like it's very fragmented. As you said, that block directory that's going to be inside of WordPress, I like that, but I don't like the fact that if I click on a block, it's going to install it as a plugin. Again, going back to Divi, I'm spoiled. I want everything in my library. I want it all go in the same spot, and I can export those and import them, trade them with friends or whatever. And I know that's hard because like Divi itself, it's like you're in the Apple closed ecosystem. The reason that works is everything I'm using, it's in Divi. It requires Divi as a theme. And I know WordPress can't do that.
Right. Well, and I don't think WordPress would want to do that because WordPress itself is supposed to stay very lean. It's only supposed to give you what you need, and then the plugins and themes are to add all of the flavors, to the expansions or whatever you want to call them. So this share a block, you have to install a plugin on your site, and then you can take the JSON file that they give you and use it and then import it. So, which is
a little bit different than I think the other site. I think.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with this other one. Copy code. Let's see. Did it just? Oh, it just went right to my thing. All right, let's see what happens. Visual editor. Nope. That just made a classic block. That's no good. So, it has a plugin too. So let's see what that was.
Yeah. Now, for a lot of people who would be in our audience, and again, the challenge being there's so much overlap, but this idea that says, I want to look at something. I want to go through you know, a portfolio, a contact sheet, of, you know, something that shows me all these things. Go, that's what I want to put on my website, and that's all of these are ways of doing that, and they're not technically they're not dissimilar, but they do approach it in different ways, which causes confusion for people who are like, oh, I like this. You know, when we get used to it, where we can either decide that we're going to pick kind of one way of doing things and just what builds from that, or be comfortable with the fact that we can go grab and pull from different things. I found myself, I go and look at something and I go, okay, I'll just use the blocks that I know and generate blocks, which is very handy for me. I mentioned it a lot, and just replicate it. Sometimes I feel like it takes me less time to replicate something than to copy things over. So it's so many different ways for people to be, you know, ultimately achieve the same goal of saying, you know, a designer made this thing, it looks great, I want to use it on my website, and then swap out the image for my image and swap out the text for my text and things like that.
Yeah, and there are a ton of things out in the market that are already allowing you to do this, like the site starter.
Yep.
I think it's from Brainstorm Force.
Yep. Brainstorm Force, Cadence, and Generate Press are examples of themes that have starter sites.
Yeah, I like this one because you can use it with any. You don't have to. It's not theme specific, and they cover several different builders. So that's just the one that I have gone to when I don't feel like designing something.
Yeah.
Which is always, I'm definitely not a designer.
Yeah.
Can I bring up a question that came up in the chat? I'll make sure I answered it, but hopefully I answered it correctly. So someone was asking about, you know, these blocks and probably more to the ones that you were showing, Daisy. So, you know, if you're copying these blocks, you know, they're concerned about how do you make sure that the code you're copying is really, you know, streamlined on the site. I think they're asking from a performance standpoint. And my answer was the block code itself. I think going back to what you showed, to me, it's markup. It's not, I know it's code, but it's more like adding a paragraph tag or an H1 tag. You know, it's telling your browser to do something. In this case, the markup is telling WordPress to do something, but it's not code like you're adding, you know, a PHP function or you're adding, you know, JavaScript or something else like that. So it's, you know, code is another term that, just like blocks, is a little bit overused. But I think as long as you're using the markup that came with WordPress, WordPress is what's really taking care of making sure that it's, you know, it's streamlined. And
right.
Okay. What about styling too?
Which is handled completely separately. That's going to be handled by your theme, which is not anything to do with the blocks actually. So yeah, you could have bloated styles for sure.
The styling question, maybe another way to ask that too is, if you go back to the Cadence one, for example, the thing that's interesting about Cadence is, if you don't mind, Daisy, add one of those blocks in that has images on it. Because I haven't figured out quite how they do this because I haven't dug into it too much. But what's kind of neat is Cadence will actually drop in even like some template of an image or something. But it's not, you know, it's not really, it's not copying it to your media library or anything. It's sort of giving you a temporary placeholder to show what it'll look like. So that's styling, but you're still responsible for actually putting in the real image and doing the real styling of it.
All right, so
and actually you had created the dog image in a block pattern, or like if you look at 2021, and that was the thing when I was playing with 2021, and then I changed the theme and it all kind of blew up, right? So that image is in the block pattern, but yeah, I went then and looked, you know, in my media library, no, it's not there. So
because I think it's being pulled in from, let's see,
by a link to an external,
from a distant place.
Yeah.
No, it's local. It's part of the theme.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
So in that case, but there could be cases where it could be pulling from a CDN or something where it's not not actually on your site.
Where did your dog block pattern, was that also in your,
It's in my media
your
library in this case, yeah.
Got it.
But my actual block pattern doesn't have an image in it. It just has a media block.
Okay, got it.
With no image. It's just a placeholder.
To kind of re-answer that question though about styling, there is styling, and I think you showed this too, there is styling that you can put in with your blocks, right? Like, so if for example, you bolded, like you put in a bullet list of items 1 through 3,
Oh, yeah. Yep.
If you had decided to make those bold and save that as a block pattern, and then you reuse that block, it would save that styling.
It would, yes. So it would be in your markup. So here I just did playing in the sand, and it just added strong tags around it.
Right. But does that mean if you actually did something further like colors, would it save inline? Let's say you change that to a blue or something.
If you did inline.
Yeah, if it's, yeah. So
I think I just saw it below there. Dave, I'm sorry, if you can go back to that code again for a second. You can see there's other styling that was in there too. That was like, you know, font size, things like that.
Right. So I've just changed the color on this one to be this purple color. So now if I go back to the code editor, then it's, in this case, because the style, that color palette is part of the theme, it didn't inline the CSS. It just gave it a new class, has purple color.
Right. You can see the heading above.
Has text color.
There's the one, the heading above, that's inline, or text align center, text color, that's CSS.
I'm looking, I'm not seeing it. I'm sure you're right, but.
I think you just highlighted it, right? The one that says text align, center, comma, text color, purple, right above.
Oh, that's actually part of the block comments. It's not CSS.
Okay.
So now what we're looking at in your sandbox is that 2021?
Yeah.
Okay, so if you were to save this, and I think this is the type of thing people are, could see, and then change it, say your theme to cadence, because the block pattern is relying on the 2021 theme and the CSS code that goes with that theme. You change your theme, that page will still have the block pattern, but will look completely different.
Yeah.
Yep. Because it doesn't have those classes.
It doesn't have those
declared
classes that
in
are
the
attached to that
CSS.
theme. And then where
Right.
I
So your content is safe, but your styling is not.
Exactly. And where it got really crazy is that some of the fancier block pattern, and if you go in to add this now, that block pattern will not be a choice here because the block pattern is tied to the theme.
Right.
When you it lives on the page, because once you placed it there, you've disconnected it from the block pattern code. In effect, you're copying it. You're making a, but the it got.
So that's where it's interesting. I keep going back to, and again, this is nothing against, I love the block pattern thing, but I keep going back to like my wonderful walled garden of Divi, where things work. It's because I'm in that walled garden, and when I'm copying stuff over, I assume that I'm copying it the same theme.
You could be in the wonderful world.
Divi is your theme. So you are doing the same thing. If you change to a different theme, you know what you'll have? A wall of short codes.
We're in the wonderful walled garden of 2021. Yeah, it's true. But it's important for people to know that while you can change theme, we talked about how you could change themes because your content is managed separately. But you can't change themes willy-nilly and think that, oh, I'm just changing the header and the footer and everything else is going to work, for example.
Never that easy on a real website.
Exactly.
Unless it's just a really simple blog and you're not that attached to any of it. I mean, that's just the reality of it. And so the rule of thumb that I would have for changing themes is you need to expect that your posts are going to be basically okay. Your blog should be basically okay, but all your pages are going to have to be rebuilt. Yeah. That's just the way it is. Yeah. And especially your homepage, because they're always going to be, so creating a child theme is always a good way rather than creating a or editing a commercially available theme. I wouldn't ever directly edit a full theme. Even if you started with 2021, best practice is to create a child theme off of it and apply your changes there.
Yeah. Where I think things are changing though is that because of block patterns, because block patterns can and are tied to themes in many cases, right? So you can do block patterns that aren't necessarily directly tied to the theme, but say, for example, 2021, and then you might say, oh, I want to use that in my blog post, and then you change your theme and that won't work.
But if you're using a child theme, then your parent themes blocks will still be there.
Block list, but the no, what I'm saying is, like, if you create a post, if you're using 2021, you create a post, you use some block patterns, and then you say, oh, you know what, I like this Astra or Cadence or Generate Press, and now you change your theme, the styling that might have been tied, you're not going to be using your child theme of 2021 won't be a child theme of Cadence. That's all I'm saying is where we've gone beyond paragraph and heading and all, and now we're adding styled block patterns of blocks. Yeah, that may rely on the theme that it came from's styling to actually work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and even beyond that, you could have, let me go back to, so this is on 2021 again. If you're in a post and you want to add a block and you want to add a columns block, I'm pretty sure that they have this for columns in here. You will have your variations, which is this screen with the white and the different versions of this block that you can use. Once you select this bit is kind of set. Not so much with columns, because you can still change the number of columns and all that, but you never see this screen again after you insert.
Yep.
But then when you select the columns block, you have these styles, and the overlap style is part of the 2021 theme. So this is another extension of theme handles. So if you have this overlap, it should have it'll say is style 2021 theme columns overlap. Yeah. So it puts that in the block information and also as a class. Mm-hmm. But if you change themes, that markup is still going to be there, but the new theme won't know what to do with it. So it's just going to show you a column block.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's where it is. I mean, it gets back to, it's confusing. It's like, now that I'm enjoying Cadence a bit too. One of the things about Cadence that got me a little spoiled is, even like Peter, you showed like the global color palette thing, which I thought was really cool. But when I first looked at it, I thought it was built into just the block editor. So I went to another site that had the block editor. I'm like, where's my color palette? It's like, so things are getting a little confusing now that themes are hiding stuff in this layout. Yeah. Which looks like, oh, that's the standard block layout. But yeah, I think at least I'm always going to have to remember, wait a minute, the theme could be messing around with this too. So.
Well, there really is an interesting thing about themes in that, you don't typically change your themes all that much unless you get to a point where you just can't do what you want to with the theme. And then what I'm finding is a lot of people, like with me, and if anyone asks me, or if I recommend to our group and all, using a Cadence or a Generate Press that is made, that you can kind of replicate things, but in a way that, you're locking yourself down into that theme, but at least you're doing it using, in effect, standard WordPress stuff plus their version versus, years ago when everything would be either a custom field or some fill in a box and it makes something. At least now you're working with the stuff on the page versus some mysterious behind the scenes thing. But yeah, once you pick a theme, just get really good at it, And hopefully you're picking one that's future proof.
Yeah, and picking one that aligns closely to WordPress would be my recommendation. I don't know that I can say Divi necessarily does that, but
Yeah.
they're very popular.
Yeah.
So,
I
but
see.
Generate Press, I like Generate Press. I
It's
think
great.
they've done a
Yeah.
very good job with keeping
Yeah.
it slim but functional.
And that's it, where another thing in terms of like which to pick, and where I've sworn off of like Elementor now is because it is so filled with everything, and people, you get tempted to use it all to keep it slim, right? And now, mobile first indexing, and there's a whole lot of reasons to do that. Ray, if you don't mind, we've got far fewer people have dropped off over time as we got more technical or whatever. Daisy, do you want to take a look at that plugin that I think Ray will get a kick out of too?
Oh, yeah. Sure. I'll go ahead and stop sharing.
Yeah, no, you can do it in yours.
I can do it. Okay.
Yeah, do it in your sandbox.
All right.
Let me tell you which plugin.
And we'll put, so for folks who also are dropping off, there are all these links, and in the chat, I'll save the chat as well. I'll put the resources in our Facebook group and in the reply to the meetup when I send out the recording as well.
Okay, so plugin is named
Block Navigation. And it's known by the three, that's it, yeah. A whole 1,000 active installation.
It's going against all of the principles that we've told people, Peter.
Yeah.
All right, bear with me a second. I'm just checking to see. So it's been around for a while.
Yeah.
It's got a lot of releases.
Yep.
All right, let's check it out.
It's not been tested with your version of WordPress. We're raising so many red flags in this demo.
Well, I'm looking at the word sandbox in the URL, so I feel fine.
I think we're safe here, but in all fairness, it's been less than a week.
Yeah. So now if you have a page or a post that has a decent amount of content on it.
Oh, all right. Well, let me see if I've got a pattern or 3 or 4
Sure,
that I can add.
Yeah.
Let's see. That one's got a few nested things going on into it. Okay.
All right. So now, if you go to the top right where the 3 lines are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, look at that.
Okay.
You can and you can drag and drop.
Oh, that's nifty.
Sold.
All right.
Yeah.
I may share this around. So the WordPress way of doing that is here. There's 3 outlined, but once you get into inner blocks, you're only seeing portions of the page because it would get kind of overwhelming. Now, accessibility people will look at this and go, "It's a sidebar. That's bad."
I know.
But
and by the way, that detach is pretty cool because you can now set the width. It'll move it over to the right, and that move, if you can drag and drop that up and out if you want.
Interesting.
And you can make it taller. And what's also nice is it gives you a little bit of the content, which the core listing doesn't. It basically says you have a column and you have a heading and but this actually tells you, even gives you that little image. If there's a heading, you get the text, so you have a much better idea of what you're moving around and all.
So
you can collapse them so that it makes it a little bit easier for the dragging and dropping.
Have you found it's easier than using this, Peter, to move stuff around, like between columns and rows? That's still my thing. Like I try to move something from one row to another. I struggle. I can't.
You know who I see would benefit from something like this is if Judith Ann had a really long post. Like you could take a Word document, drag it all in here, and then if you say now I want to reorganize or whatever, you could just
move the headings around or sections.
Exactly. Yeah. I looked at it and go, oh, this is slick. Yeah, I'm not going to vouch for how the accessibility of dragging and dropping and all, but that's kind of what everything is anyway.
Make sure you put this one in our notes there, Peter.
Yeah.
I want to send this one out. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is jazzy, and the other one that is kind of neat. It's very different than this. Is and this is where we get into the whole issue of how much overlap there is, right? So, so there's the Editor Plus, the Gutenberg Block Library Toolkit, which basically gives you a lot of the control that some of the themes are building in with, like, kind of global styles and things. But basically what it does at its base level that's very cool is it takes all blocks, but basically if you take the core blocks and then gives you a lot more of the things that you might find in a Cadence Pro or a Generate blocks, where you can set the margins and the borders and the background colors and things. But for all the blocks and kind of universally, it's pretty. If you started with core and then picked one of the themes, I would never use.
I wonder how well that plays, though. Like, have you tried that on a Cadence theme? Because Cadence is going to have its own set of controls.
I have not tried the ones where, and I know that there is, built into a lot of these things is a couple of these really well-coded ones have a certain hierarchical kindness that says, well, if you pick that, then I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to give you the same one. But if you were just starting off with, a free Generate, Press, or Cadence, and then we're using primarily, all you needed was the WordPress blocks because you wanted to put images and headings and things like that. But now you want to have a little bit more control over the colors and the borders, right, Judith Ann? Putting this Editor Plus layer on all of a sudden makes all of those blocks have more functionality built into it. Now, so did you add this? This is
I think so, but I don't know what to do with it. It's
yeah,
I may be missing something.
Yeah, so there's not, all it does is now if you go to like a standard block, like go to a post and then just add like
or click on one of those, right?
Not a block pattern.
I see it. Okay. Yeah.
It's turning into a page builder.
Exactly. Now you're getting all of this additional function, and you can there's overwhelm. So the idea that you can turn some of the functionality off too is always,
Yeah. One thing that will come with full site editing if you do have a block-based theme is global styles, which would not be this granular. Yeah. In terms of like a per block, like change it on this specific block, but it would be like, if it's this kind of block, then apply these styles to it. So yeah.
So speaking of that, and I know we're kind of running short on time here, but looking in the future a little bit, Daisy, in terms of as you mentioned, I know and Peter talked about this earlier, if the future in WordPress is being able to use the block editor for all parts of your website, like headers or footers, how does that relate to patterns that you were just talking about? Can you also use patterns, as you're building that header or footer, or like, I guess, how do those concepts relate to each other?
So I think that you have blocks that are not really designed to be used in a header or footer, and so it wouldn't be universal. But let's see. Let's test since we're here. I've got the Gutenberg plugin installed, and I should probably have a block-based theme installed here.
Yeah, I can't remember. There's the one that they're specifically talking about is for full site editing. Can't remember what one that is.
2021 blocks. There's Bosco is another one.
Yeah, Bosco,
and then
yeah, that's one I've heard them talk about.
Yeah, so there are 3 right now that I'm aware of that are all fairly updated.
So you're using an experimental full site editing theme. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
So if you go into template parts, you have your header. Now this is all very like early days.
Yeah.
They have a long ways to go, but you can see if I go into the header, I could, let's see, add a pattern. So let's try updating that. Let's go to a page if it'll save it. Don't like the double click thing. Let's go to a post and preview. And there it is. There's that thing I just added to the header. So it was a block pattern that I added it to the header.
Okay, which makes sense. I mean, it's just because it's a collection of blocks. So you know, if you're able to update your header with a block, then yeah, you think you can do a pattern as well.
No, of course they could change it tomorrow because this plugin is released every 2 weeks.
We'll have to bring you back once the theme editor capability is a little bit more far along.
I would love to come back as long as you guys are doing remote meetings. Though it would be hard at the end to get home, but 2 hours.
Yeah.
I actually, my sister-in-law used to live in Connecticut, but she doesn't anymore. She lives here now. But
we actually had somebody came from, do you remember one of our meetings, Peter? Somebody, I know we have people from Massachusetts. We had somebody come from New Hampshire once. I don't remember what the topic was, but whatever.
She had a horse farm. I remember that she had a horse farm.
That's interesting. There aren't that many. I don't think there are that many horse farms in New Hampshire.
Yeah.
Maybe there's some.
We have a quick question from Heather. She's asking about your Sandbox site. She's saying, is your Sandbox site on a hosted account or are you using XXAMP or another local host?
So I put this online. This is hosted on my web server, but what I like for really easy, there are a couple things. One is you can use local WP.
Yep.
I have the link here. It's free. It's free as long as you're not planning on moving it to a live site. So they start charging.
Yeah. Ray and I use it and like it a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's one way of doing it. You can use XAMPP or LAMP or WAMP or MAMP or any of those varieties. So that's a little harder. There's also Docker, which is a lot harder. And you can, there's this is really limited in what you can do. But if you just want to test something real quick, there's this tastewp.com and you can spin up an actual online site. So, and if you have a really small site, you can import your site into it.
There was a weird one that I used. I hesitate to even mention. It was something really ridiculous, like Poopy or something. It would give you these URLs that were just horrible and ridiculous. So you'd never use them, but they would, you'd be able to spin up a site quickly and then delete it afterwards. But yeah, forget it. Don't use it.
Yeah, and if you want to go really like high end, you can set up a site on Pantheon, and as long as you don't put a domain name on it, it'll be free.
Oh, interesting.
Okay.
So, they're a much more expensive managed hosting though.
Well, I know we're running out of time here, but Daisy, I appreciate this so much. I mean, again, I think thanks for everyone who held on to. I mean, I love this because part of it was I love the developer side of it, but also I like seeing the practicality of it. And again, even somebody like myself who's using a page builder, it's nice to see where things are going. So as I said, I think some of the ideas that really drew me to page builders now, to me, it makes sense to pull those back into core. And I think it's really good to see the future of where things are going here. So
yep. Thank
you so much. And if folks have questions afterwards, if they want to reach out to you, we can either pass them along to you or you joined our group too. So afterwards, Daisy, if you don't mind, maybe you can send me afterwards some contact information if people want to reach out to you for.
Oh, sure thing. Yeah.
Any closing questions from anyone, or any challenges people have run into that? Nope. Good.
All right. Yeah, like I said, I know for some of our topics here are beginner related, but even if you're a beginner and some of this didn't, I would say too, one of the things is like topics like this, which we do on occasion, even if things go over your head a little bit, what I've found is, you know, the more you work with WordPress, I think you get exposed to concepts that over time, you'll see it later, you know, and you'll see it in a different circumstance and you'll say, hey, wait a minute, yeah, what's the difference between this reusable blocks versus the pattern? And hopefully you'll go back to this and say, oh, I heard about that. You know, it's something I haven't tried before. And you know, kind of wrapping things up on the sandbox too. We always say this in all of our presentations, play around in a sandbox environment, you know, not on your production website, but you know, that's the best way I think to learn these things is go in a safe environment. If you break things, who cares, you know, but you learn a lot by breaking things, you know, sometimes more so than by being successful. So. Well, thank you so much again, Daisy. We appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
For our group, and thanks everyone again for joining. And have a good night. We'll announce our January one probably towards the end of the month or so. Or I know it's only a few weeks left. Thanks everyone again. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Have a good night.